For 19 years I worked the weft alone, and in all that time, the loudest thing aboard the dray was my own breathing. The weft is a dead lane. Once it was a shipping run, back when the Concord still moved ore through this arm of the reach, and then the routes shifted the way routes do, and the lane silted up with everything nobody came back for. Hulls, cargo pods with the manifests scoured off, lifeboats that never made landfall. It drifts there in the dark, turning slow, and a man with a good tow cradle and no particular reason to be anywhere else can make a thin living pulling metal out of it and selling the metal on. That was me, Ezra Colt, 43 years old that season, though I'd stopped marking birthdays a long way back, gray coming into the stubble, a bad shoulder that ached before a burn and a scar along the jaw I'd got so young I couldn't remember earning it. I was not a handsome man and had never been one, and out there it did not matter because there was no one to be handsome for. There was the ship, and the work, and the long quiet, and I had made my peace with all three the way you make peace with weather. The dray was a workhorse and looked it. She was all tow cradle and grapple and a hold you could have parked a house in, and up front a cramped nest of a cabin where I ate and slept and watched the drift come at me on the scopes. She smelled of hot metal and old coffee, and the particular mildew of a life support loop that has been recycling the same air past the same man for 2 decades. I loved her the way you love a thing that has kept you alive without ever once thanking you for the trouble. I found the lifeboat on a gray shift near the bottom of the lane, where the drift packs densest. It came up on the mass scope as a small return, wrong-shaped for cargo. I nearly passed it. A pod that size this deep in the weft is usually a coffin, somebody's last bad idea, cold for a century, nothing inside but the shape a person had made when the heat gave out. I have opened enough of those. You learn to read them and you learn to leave the reading alone. But the transponder was still ticking. Faint, almost nothing. A cold little pulse that should have died with the batteries a long time ago and hadn't, and something in it, some drag in the rhythm, some stubbornness, made me put the coffee down and swing the dray around. I brought her in slow, grappled the pod, drew it into the tow cradle, and let the hold pressurize around it while I stood there in the cold looking at what I'd caught. It wasn't human make. I knew that at a glance. The lines were wrong, too fluid, a sweep to them where our engineers would have put a seam. Isari work, I thought, though I didn't know the word yet. There were marks etched into the skin of the pod near where a hatch would be, and someone had gone at those marks with a cutting tool and scoured them off. Deliberate, ugly, the way you'd deface a thing you were afraid could be traced. Whoever had scoured them had been in a hurry or afraid or both. The pod's own systems were dead. I had to crack it by hand, and it fought me, and when the seal finally gave, it breathed out a gust of foul recycled cold that told me its loop had been failing for a long, long time. Inside was a woman. Not a coffin shape, a woman curled on her side alive. I have thought since about the exact order in which I understood things in that moment because it mattered later, and the order was this. First, alive. Second, not human, the skin a deep dusk indigo near to black in the low light and the ears drawn to points, and the whole shape of her longer and finer than ours the way a heron is longer and finer than a man. Third, and this is the one that stopped me, her eyes were open, and they did not find me. They should have. I was standing right over her with the hold lamp behind my head, a great human shadow leaning into her broken box, and any creature that could see would have flinched from that. She didn't flinch. Her eyes were open and turned up toward the sound of me, and they were the wrong color for open eyes, a clouded milk pale. A fog laid over what I could tell had once been a hot amber gold, the way frost lays over a lamp. Burned. Scorched blind, and not long enough ago for the wound to have gone quiet. She was blind, and she had been drifting in the dark. She couldn't have seen anyway for longer than that pod had any right to keep a body warm. Easy, I said. It came out rough. I hadn't used the word on another living thing in a long while. Easy now, you're aboard a ship, you're out of the cold. She didn't understand the words. Of course she didn't. But she understood the pitch of them, the low, steady human of them, and I watched her whole body decide in 1 second whether the sound was a threat, and decide barely, that it might not be. Her hand came up, not toward me, toward the air between us, fingers spread, reading, looking for the shape of the danger, the only way left to her. I did the thing I've done 1,000 times when a spooked animal or a spooked man puts a hand out into the dark. I stopped moving. I let my breathing go slow and loud so she could hear where I was. And I put my own hand out, palm up, low, not touching, just there, so that when her searching fingers found it, they'd find something open. They found it. Cold fingers, long, 4 of them, and a thumb, cold as the pod. They closed around the side of my hand and gripped, hard, the grip of someone who has been alone at the bottom of a very deep well and has just heard a voice at the top of it. "There," I said, "there you are." That was the whole of it, that first night. She gripped my hand until she was sure the hand was real and would not vanish. And then, because whatever reserve had kept her alive in that box had nothing left in it, she went under, not sleep exactly, more a body finally allowing itself to stop, and I got my other arm under her and lifted her out of the ruined pod and carried her the length of the hold and up into the warm. She weighed nothing. That is not a figure of speech. She weighed less than she should have by half, and I could feel the wrongness of it through my arms, the long fast down of starvation, and I thought, carrying her, that whatever she had been before the dark took her, she had not been someone you would expect to find starved and blind and scoured and dumped at the bottom of a dead lane. There was a bearing in her even limp against my chest, a way the head was set. I didn't have a word for it. I had it long before I had the word. I put her in my own bunk, which was the only bunk, and I sat on the deck beside it with my back to the wall and did not sleep. And somewhere in that first watch, I stopped thinking of her as a salvage return and started thinking of her as a passenger. And there is a great deal of difference between those two things when you are alone. She woke frightened, and I had expected that. What I hadn't expected was how she managed it. She came up out of the dark with a soldier's speed, one hand already sweeping for a weapon, the other flat to the bulkhead to fix herself in space. And then she froze all at once, because the room made no sense to a blind woman and she knew it, and she made herself go still and quiet and listen instead of thrash. It was the most disciplined, frightened waking I have ever watched. It told me things about her she would not tell me for days. "You're on the dray," I said from where I sat not moving. "Salvage tug, you're safe. I'm the only one aboard." Nothing. Then her mouth moved and out came a language I'd never heard, liquid, tonal, a rise and fall to it like water over stone. She said it again, slower, a question in it. I don't have the gift of tongues, but every long hauler carries a battered old translation slab for the day they have to argue with a port official in a language they don't speak. And I dug mine out of a drawer and thumbed it on and set it on the blanket by her hand where she could hear it hum. It took the slab most of an hour to find her, matching fragments, guessing, correcting. Isari, it decided at last. A high court dialect, it said, which meant nothing to me then. And once it had her, I could talk to her, in the flat, dead voice of a machine that turns one person's words into another's. And that is a poor way to meet someone, but it is a great deal better than the dark. "What is this place?" she said. The slab gave it to me without inflection, but I could hear the real voice underneath, and the real voice was holding very level on purpose. "A ship, mine. We're in a shipping lane called the Weft, an old dead one out past the Concord's edge. I pull salvage here." I paused. "I pulled your pod out of the drift about 10 hours ago. Your life support had failed. You'd have been dead inside a day." She took that in. Her clouded eyes moved as she thought, the way a sighted person's do. An old habit, the blindness hadn't broken yet. "You are not Asari," she said. "No, I'm human. Do you know what that is?" A pause, a minor species, frontier stock, traders, a beat. "I did not know your kind came this far in." "We go where the metal is," I said. "Not many of us, just the ones with nowhere better to be." She almost smiled at that. It went across her face and off it. Then the fear came back into her, cold and practical, and she said the thing she'd clearly been circling toward. "Who sent you?" No one sends me anywhere. That's rather the whole point of me. You will forgive me if I do not believe that. The slab was flat, but her jaw was not. Men do not find me by accident. Every man who has found me for a long time now was sent. I found a transponder ticking at the bottom of a dead lane, I said. That's all I found. I didn't know what was in the box until I opened it, and I nearly didn't bother because boxes that size out here are usually coffins. I let that sit. If someone sent me to find you, they've a strange way of going about it, seeing as I've no idea who you are, and I'd have to charge them for the fuel. She was quiet a moment, then low, you do not know who I am. No, you truly do not. Truly. And something happened in her face that I didn't understand then and have never quite forgotten. It wasn't relief. It was close to grief. As if being unknown was the strangest gift anyone had handed her in a long while, and it hurt going in. She didn't tell me her name. I didn't push. I have hauled enough frightened cargo, human cargo, sometimes in bad years, refugees and debtors and worse, to know that a name is the last thing a hunted person gives up, and that you get nowhere demanding it. So I gave her mine instead, because it costs nothing and it evens a scale. Ezra, I said, Ezra Colt. If you need me, that's the word to say. She turned the name over. Ezra, she repeated, and in her mouth, through her tongue, the hard consonants of it went soft. You said you are the only one aboard. That's right. Then I will trust that at least. It is easy to check. She lifted her hand and moved it through the air, mapping the small volume of the cabin she could reach, learning the walls of her new box. How long, she said, not looking at me because she couldn't, have I been blind? I hadn't expected the question and I didn't have an answer for it. I don't know, I said. Not too long by the look of the burns. Weeks, maybe. Longer than that adrift, I think. Your pod's loop was near the end. You'd been in it a while. Weeks, she said. She said it the way you'd test the weight of a stone you meant to carry a long way. Yes, that would be right. She didn't cry. I want to set that down plainly because later, when I'd learned what she'd lost, I understood how much it should have cost her to keep it down, and how deliberately she was keeping it down, right there in front of a stranger in the dark, aboard a ship she couldn't see, among a species she'd been taught was minor. She held her water like a dam holds a spring. You could see the strain of it in her, wet at the rims, composed above. I got up slow, telling her every move. I'm standing. I'm going to the galley, 3 steps. You'll hear the hatch. Because I'd already worked out that the kindest thing I could do for a blind woman who thought she'd been found by killers was narrate my own hands, so nothing I did came at her from nowhere. I made broth. It was ship broth out of a pouch, nothing to be proud of, but it was hot and it had salt and fat in it and her body needed both. I poured it into a dented steel mug, the good one, the one that didn't leak. And before I gave it to her, I ran my thumb around the rim and found a burr in the metal, a little rough tongue where the mug had been dropped once too often, and I got a file out of the kit and took it down smooth. It took a minute. It seemed to me a thing worth a minute, that a blind woman feeling for the rim of a cup in the dark shouldn't find an edge that cut her. I put the mug into her 2 hands and closed her fingers around it and held them there until I was sure she had it. Broth, I said. It's hot, both hands. There's no edge on it. I took the burr off so you can drink from any side. She went very still around the mug. You filed the cup, she said. It was rough. You couldn't see it, seemed unfair. She drank. She drank the whole of it, slow, and when it was gone she held the empty mug against her chest with both hands like it was worth more empty, and she said, in a voice the slab couldn't flatten enough to hide, no one has done a small thing for me in a very long time, only large things with prices on them. I had forgotten there were small things. I didn't know what to say to that, so I did what I do, which is work. I told her I was going to look at her eyes, and I told her before every touch, and I got the medkit's little scope and looked, and it was as bad as I'd feared, and there was nothing in my kit or my skill that could undo it. The burn had taken the seeing part. I could ease it. There were drops that would stop the ache, and I had those, and I put them in and heard her sigh when the ache let go, but I could not give her back the light. I told her so plainly because I've been lied to by men in coats, and I know how it corrodes you, and I'd not do it to her. I can stop the pain, I said. I can't bring the sight back. I'm sorry. That's the truth of it, and I won't dress it. Thank you, she said, for not dressing it. And I understood that the honesty was its own small filed edge, one more thing she hadn't been given in a long while. That night by the ship's clock, there is no night in the weft, I moved my bedroll to the deck and gave her the bunk for good, and I lay there listening to a stranger breathe in my ship for the first time in 19 years, and I found I did not mind the sound at all. I found I had been starved of it and hadn't known. She would not tell me her name, but she let me tell her the world, and that turned out to be the road between us. It started small. She was awake and restless the second day, sitting up, hands mapping the blanket, and she said, abrupt, "What does it look like, out there, the lane?" "You want me to describe it?" "I want to know where I am," she said, and then lower, "I have not seen anything for a long time. Before the pod, before the burn, I was kept in a hold with no ports. I would like to know the shape of the dark I am in, even if I cannot see it. If that is a foolish thing to want, tell me and I will stop wanting it." "It's not foolish," I said, and I sat down on the deck by the bunk and I described the weft to her. I'm no poet, but I know the drift the way you know a road you've driven 10,000 times, and I told her about it plain and true, the long, slow turning of the dead hulls, the way the light of the far suns caught the frost on them, the cargo pods with their scoured manifests, the whole silted length of the lane, and the packed places at the bottom where the metal gathers thickest, and the salvage is richest, and a man could work a lifetime and never clear it. I told her which directions had stars in them and which had only the black between arms. I told her the dray was pointed, right then, at a smear of pale that the charts called the coal sack and I called nothing, because I liked it, and a thing you like doesn't need a chart name. She listened the way I've never had anyone listen to me. Her whole face turned to my voice and stayed there, and her clouded eyes moved as if they were tracking the things I named, building the lane behind them out of sound, and when I finished she was quiet a while and then she said, "You love it." "I've spent 19 years in it," I said. "You don't spend 19 years anywhere without it getting into you. That is not the same as loving it." "No," I admitted, "it's not, but it turned out to be the same for me." After that she asked me to describe things the way another person might ask for water, the hold and what was in it, the salvage I pulled and where I sold it and what the ports were like, the stars I could name and the ones I couldn't. My hands once, describe your hands, I have only felt them, and I told her, awkward, that they were a working man's hands, big, scarred, a finger that had healed crooked, nothing to look at, and she said, they did not feel like nothing, and I let that go by because I didn't know where to put it. And in the describing I learned her, sideways, the way she'd let herself be learned. She knew ships, knew them at a level I didn't, would correct the slab when it fumbled a technical term, would ask about the dray's tow cradle and its rating and nod at the answer like a woman checking a subordinate's sums. She knew law conquered law, reached law, the law of who owns what adrift, and once, when I mentioned the salvage claim I'd file on her pod, her whole body went sharp and she said fast, "Do not file it. Do not register anything you found. Not the pod, not the transponder, not anything you found inside it." And the pause before anything was where I lived for a moment, understanding that she meant herself, that she was cargo someone was hunting a manifest for. "Someone's looking for you," I said. It wasn't a question. "Someone is always looking for me now," she said. "The looking is the point of me. There is a great deal of paper that says I am dead, and men are paid to make the paper true." "Why?" She didn't answer, not that day. It was the scanner that answered in the end, and I have gone back and forth for years on whether I should have run it, and I've never settled the argument with myself, so I'll only set down what I did. The Dre's med alcove has a genome reader in it. It's not a fine instrument. It's the kind of thing you use to match a frozen salvage corpse to a bounty or a next of kin, so you know whether there's money in the body or just a burial to pay for. It reads a sample and shells out to whatever registry it can reach and comes back with a name if a name is out there to be had. I ran it because she was starving and I needed to know her chemistry to feed her right, and any blood I drew for that would run the genome by default. And I didn't think. I'll be honest. I didn't think about what it would find, because I'd been thinking of her as a woman for 2 days and had half forgotten she was a mystery. It found a great deal. The slab lit and scrolled, and I stood there in the med alcove reading it with a cold going up my back. The genome had matched, not to a bounty, to a registry, a deep one, an old sealed noble registry that the reader had no business being able to reach and had reached anyway through some cracked back door. And the registry had come back with a name and a house and a title and a status. And the status, in the flat gray letters of the machine, was one word. ENDAD. The house was vain. The title ran 3 lines. And the name, when the slab finally gave it to me plain, was Naileth. I stood there a long moment with the machine humming. Then I shut it off, and I went forward, and I sat down on the deck by the bunk where she was sitting up with her ruined eyes turned toward the sound of me, already reading the change in my step, and I said, "Naileth." She went a stone. I have never seen a person go so still so fast. Every line of her locked. Her hands, which had been mapping the blanket, stopped flat against it. And when she spoke, the slab could not flatten it enough. The voice under the voice had gone to a whisper with a blade in it. "Where," she said, "did you get that word?" "Your blood." The reader ran it against a registry when I drew it to feed you. I wasn't hunting for it, it just came up. I kept my own voice as level as I could. It gave me a house, vain, and a title I didn't finish reading, and it said the status was ended. I paused. It said you were dead. Her hands came up off the blanket and she pressed the heels of them to her clouded eyes. Hard. The first uncontrolled thing I'd seen her do. And she held them there. And when she took them away, her face was wet. She'd let it go at last. Just a little, just enough. But her jaw was still level under the wet, and she said, "Then you know. And now there is a price on your ship, whether you file anything or not, because you have looked at a thing you were not meant to look at." "Tell me," I said, "tell me what I looked at." And she did. In the dark, in the flat voice of a machine, a blind woman told me what I'd pulled out of the drift. She had been sovereign of the Asari Reach. Naileth of House Vane, the last of a line older than the conquered that had swallowed it. There'd been a coup, a cold, quiet, bureaucratic thing, more paperwork than blood. The Ortolan conquered, absorbing the Reach the way a large debt absorbs a small one, and the old sovereign line was an inconvenience to the arithmetic, so the arithmetic had been arranged to erase it. Her flagship had been taken. In the taking, an overload, a blast of raw light through a failing shield, close, too close, had scorched her sight away in an instant. And here was the thing I had not understood, the thing that was the whole cruelty of it. Her own people had let her go. "Among the Asari," she said, and the slab could not soften it, and neither could she. "The sovereign is the one who sees. It is not a figure of speech. It is the oldest thing we have. The sovereign sees for the Reach, watches the far dark for it is its eyes. There is a right. There are 10,000 years of it. A blind sovereign is not a sovereign who has been hurt. A blind sovereign is an omen, a broken sign, a thing the Reach reads as the end of the line, the sky's own verdict, and turns its face from." She drew a breath. When my sight went, my own loyalists, the ones who had died to get me off the flagship, looked at my eyes and understood that I could no longer be what I was. Not to them. Not to a people who had been taught for 10,000 years that a blinded sovereign is the sky closing a book. They did not kill me. They loved me too well for that and hated the omen too much to keep it. So they did the third thing. They put me in a pod, and they did not enter it in any log, and they let me drift, and they let the record say I died clean aboard the flagship, a whole sovereign, unbroken. so the line could end with dignity instead of ending with a blind woman it was ashamed of. She stopped, the ship hummed. "They mourn me beautifully, I am sure," she said. "I have no doubt the mourning was very fine. It is easier to mourn a sovereign who saw than to serve one who cannot. So I was mourned, and I was erased, and I was left, and every man who has found me since was sent by the conquered to make certain the erasure held, because a dead line on paper is only safe if it is also a dead line in fact, and I am the fact that has not yet died." I sat there a long while. I have not got the education to argue theology with a woman whose people had 10,000 years of it, but I have pulled a great many things out of the dark that other people threw away, because the throwing away was easier than the keeping, and I have never once found that the throwing away made the thing worthless. It only made it thrown away. Those are different words and men are forever confusing them. "That's a stupid rule," I said. The slab rendered it flat. She laughed, a real one, cracked and surprised out of her, the first true laugh, and it changed her whole face for the half-second it lasted. "It is 10,000 years old," she said. "It's 10,000 years stupid then. A thing being old just means it's had longer to be wrong in." I leaned forward. "You steered a flagship. You corrected my translation slab on toe cradle ratings. You've read law at me for 2 days that I couldn't follow. You went blind and starving in a box for weeks and came out of it disciplined enough to sit still in a room you couldn't see because thrashing might have got you killed. I don't know what your people think the eyes are for. But whatever you actually are, whatever does the ruling, the seeing ahead, the being worth following, it's plainly not in your eyes, because your eyes are gone and the rest of it walked out of that pod hole." She didn't answer at once. "You are going to sell me," she said finally, but she said it like a woman testing a floor she already suspects will hold. "That is what this is. You know what I am worth now. Ended lines are worth a great deal to the men who need them to stay ended. You will find a conquered relay and you will sell me, and you will be a rich man in a dead lane." "No," I said. "Everyone sells me." "Then everyone's a fool, or a coward, or paid," I said. "I'm none of the three. I'm just a man with a big empty ship who pulled a woman out of the cold and found out she'd been thrown away by people too frightened of her eyes to keep the rest of her. I've spent 19 years turning thrown away things back into things worth having. I'm not about to start throwing them the other way now." I got up, told her I was getting up, 3 steps, the hatch. And at the hatch I stopped because there was one more thing, and it was the only thing I had that was hers and not the conquered's. "Naileth Vane," I said, and I read it to her, the whole of it, the name and the house and the 3 lines of title the machine had given me. Read plain and slow and level into the cabin, every word of it, the way you read something back to its owner so they know it's theirs and hasn't been taken. That's who the reader says drifted into my hold. Sovereign of the Asari Reach. Last of House Vane. I don't know your rights and I can't see your omens and I'll never pretend to. But that name isn't ended aboard this ship. I'll say it as often as you want to hear it, and I'll not say it to a soul you don't want it said to. It's yours. Nobody scoured it off you. They only stopped saying it." She had gone very still again, but it wasn't the stone stillness of before. It was the stillness of a person holding something too full to move. "Say it once more," she said, "the whole of it slowly." I did. "And Naileth Vane, last sovereign of a people who had left her for a bad sign in the dark, sat in a salvage-miner's bunk with her ruined eyes streaming and her jaw held level above the streaming, and she said the name back with me, under her breath, in her own tongue, the way you'd say a word you'd been forbidden to say and had just been handed back, as if she were relearning that it belonged in her mouth. They came 4 days later. I'd known they might. She told me the shape of it, that the conquered ran confirm kill sweeps on erased lines, cutters working outward from the relays, closing loose accounts. And I'd used the 4 days. I'm a salvage man. I know how to make a ship hard to find and how to make a claim stick and how to bury a thing so deep in the paper it can't be quietly dug up. I hadn't been idle. But when the cutters' return finally bloomed on my scope, lean and fast in Concord gray, coming up the lane straight at the dray on a course that had no salvage reason to it. My mouth still went dry. "They're here," I said. She was on her feet already, one hand to the bulkhead. "How many?" "One cutter, small, fast." I read the transponder. "It's flagged as a registrar's vessel, not military, administrative." "That is worse," she said. "A registrar does not come to fight. A registrar comes to file. They are here to look at me, confirm the fact, and enter the closing. Everything the Concord does that is unforgivable it does with a clerk." Her clouded eyes turned toward the hull as if she could see through it. "Ezra, listen to me. When they board, they will board. They are permitted to board any vessel holding disputed salvage, and I am disputed salvage. Do not stand in front of me. It will only get you filed alongside. Give me to them. Say I drifted in dead. Say you found a corpse. They will scan and know I am not a corpse, but if you have not obstructed them, they may let you keep your ship. I am already ended. You are not. Do not spend a whole man on an ended line." "Sit down," I said. "Ezra." "Sit down, Naileth, please, and let me work. This isn't your kind of fight, it's mine. You said it yourself, everything unforgivable they do with a clerk. Well, I was already at the com, already pulling up the files I'd spent 4 days building. I've spent 19 years fighting clerks over salvage. It's the only fight I've ever won." She sat. It cost her something to sit. Every soldier's instinct in her wanted to stand, but she sat. And she trusted me to be right. And I have never in my life been so afraid of being wrong. The registrar's name was Halden. He came across cold and correct, and he came aboard with 2 silent Concord men in gray and a slate under his arm. And he was exactly what she'd said, a clerk, mild, unhurried. A man who closed lines the way another man files receipts, without heat, without any sense that the lines had been people. He looked at me the way you look at a fixture. He looked at her, sitting in the bunk with her ruined eyes turned toward him, and something moved in his face. Not pity, worse than pity, a kind of satisfaction, the satisfaction of a sum coming out even. "Sovereign Vane," he said, and he made the title a small cruelty by using it. "The Reach mourned you very beautifully. I attended the rite myself. It is disappointing to find the fact incomplete." He lifted his slate. "This will be brief. A confirmation scan, a closing entry, and the record is made whole. You have been, if it is any comfort, extraordinarily difficult to complete. That is nearly a compliment." "Register," I said. He looked at me as if a bulkhead had spoken. "I beg your pardon. You said you're a registrar. You're here to file a closing on this woman. To do that you have to enter it in the registry, the sealed noble registry, House Vane's line, the same one that currently reads ended." I stepped between him and the bunk, slow, easy, a big scarred man in a dirty coat taking up the middle of his own hold. "I want you to know something before you file it. I've already reached that registry." The first crack went through the mildness, small but there. "That registry is sealed," Halden said. "It's sealed to people who follow rules," I said. "I'm a salvage man in a dead lane. Sealed things are my whole living. 4 days ago my genome reader shelled out to that registry to identify a body I'd pulled from the drift, and it got through a back door your people never bothered to weld shut because who out here would ever knock? And when it got through, it did what my reader always does when it finds a live match on a dead flagged line. It logged it. I let that land. There is now an entry in the sealed noble registry of the Asari Reach," I said. "Date stamped 4 days ago, independently generated, cryptographically signed by an instrument that isn't yours and can't be leaned on, stating that the genome of Naileth Vane, House Vane, status ended, returned a living match aboard an independent vessel. That entry has already propagated. I made sure of it. I'm a salvage man. Propagating claims into registries so they can't be quietly pulled is the one thing I'm actually good at. It's in the Reach registry. It's in 2 Concord relays. It's in a Freeport claims ledger that your people can't touch because it isn't yours. The line does not read ended anymore. It reads disputed, living match logged, confirmation pending, and there are now more copies of that dispute than you can find in a year. The mildness was entirely gone now. Halden's clerk calm had a hairline through it. That is a fabrication I can simply overwrite, he said, but the certainty had thinned. You can enter a closing, I agreed. You can file that she's dead, and your closing will sit in the registry right next to a signed, independent propagated entry that says the genome came back living 4 days before your closing was filed. Any auditor, any rival house, any conquered faction that wants leverage on the men who ran this coup, and there are always factions who want leverage. Any one of them who pulls that line will see a registrar entered a death after an instrument logged a life. You won't have closed a line. You'll have signed your name to closing a line you knew was living. That's not a mourned sovereign, Halden. That's a murdered one with the paperwork to prove the murder was administrative. I leaned in just slightly. You do everything unforgivable with a clerk. Fine. Then the clerk's name is on it. Yours is. And it's on it in a place you can't scrub in more copies than you can chase forever. The hold was very quiet. One of the gray men shifted his weight. I watched Halden do the arithmetic. That was the whole of it in the end. I told her the truth. It was his kind of fight and not hers and not mine. But I'd learned enough of his kind of fight in 19 years of clawing salvage claims out of men exactly like him to know that a clerk cannot be frightened and cannot be shamed, but can, always, be shown a sum that comes out against him. He was not a man who would die for the conquered. He was a man who filed for it, and you do not file yourself into a murder charge for an employer. The confirmation, he said at last, and his voice had gone flat and careful, cannot be completed. The instrument is, a pause, hunting for the word that would let him leave compromised. A living match logged by an independent reader constitutes a material dispute. Confirmation of an ended status cannot be entered over an unresolved dispute. Procedure does not permit it. He was reading himself an exit off his own slate, and I let him, because a clerk who has found procedural cover will follow it out the door as fast as he followed it in. This is now a matter for the registry adjudicators, not for a field closing. He looked at her once more, and the satisfaction was gone out of his face, and what was left was a man who'd come to file an ending and been handed, instead, a mess he could not close and could not afford to force. The dispute stands. The line is open. Open, I said. Pending, he corrected, clerk to the last, but not ended. I cannot enter ended. He gathered his slate to his chest. I will note the vessel refused to permit completion. Note whatever you like, I said. It's in more copies than you can chase, too. He went. The gray men went. The cutter uncoupled and pulled away up the lane, lean and fast and beaten by nothing but a salvage man's understanding of paper, and I stood in the middle of my hold and shook quietly. The way you shake after a thing that could have gone the other way, and I did not let her hear it in my breathing. She heard it anyway. Of course she did. She'd learned my breathing before she'd learned anything else about me. They are gone, she said. Not a question, she'd tracked the whole of it by sound, the cutter's uncoupling, the change in the hull. They're gone, I said. And your line's not ended, it's disputed. Which I know it's not the same as restored. It's not a thrown back. It's just a fact on paper that says you're alive and they knew it. But an ended line you can bury. A disputed one propagates. As long as that dispute's out there, and it's out there for good now, there's a signed fact in a dozen registries that says the last sovereign of the Asari Reach did not die clean aboard her flagship. She lived. And somebody left her for an omen, and somebody else pulled her out of the cold. I put my file kit down on the bench with a hand that had steadied. That's a stone in their shoe forever. It's the smallest thing, but it's true and it's yours and they can't scour it off. She stood up from the bunk. She stood and she came toward me across the hold slow, one hand out, reading the air. 3 steps she'd mapped 100 times now until she knew my ship better blind than most sighted men know theirs. And she stopped in front of me, close, her ruined milk-pale eyes turned up to where my face was, finding it by the sound of my breathing. I want to see you, she said. I didn't understand. You. I cannot, she said. I know I cannot. I will never see you the way my people mean the word, and my people were wrong about the word, and you taught me they were wrong. So I will see you the way that is left to me. Hold still. And she lifted both her hands, cold, long fingers, and she laid them flat against my chest first, over the heart, feeling it go, the fast, frightened beat of it that I'd been hiding. And then she brought them up, slow, reading to my throat, my jaw, the old scar along it she'd have no story for, the rough stubble, the broken line of a nose set badly by no one. The whole plain, weathered, unhandsome map of a face that had spent 19 years alone in a dead lane, and never once expected to be read by anyone. She read it with her fingertips the way I described the weft to her, building me behind her ruined eyes, out of touch the way she'd built the lane out of my voice. You told me your hands were nothing to look at, she said. You were wrong about your hands. You are wrong about your face. You have the plainest face I have ever touched, and there is not one omen in it, and I have decided that I trust the plainness more than I ever trusted anything that shone. Her thumbs rested at the corners of my jaw. Her voice had gone very low, under the machine, under everything. My people believe the sovereign is the one who sees. For 10,000 years that, and I cannot see. So I am no sovereign, by the oldest law we have. Naileth me finish, I have not finished. Her clouded eyes held on my face, though they couldn't find it. I cannot see, but you can. You saw a ticking box at the bottom of a dead lane and did not pass it. You saw a thing everyone else threw away and pulled it into the warm. You saw a blind woman a whole reach turned its face from, and you felled a cup smooth so her hand would not be cut, and you read her name back to her in the dark. You see, Ezra Colt, better than any sovereign my people ever crowned. So. Her hand settled, warm now, against my jaw. If the one who sees is the one who leads, then let me stand where you can see for me, and I will do the rest of what a sovereign is for. And between the two of us there will be nothing broken. That is not a right. My people have no right for it. I am making it up here in your hold, because I have decided the 10,000-year one was wrong, and I am the last of the line, and it is mine to say. She was so close I could feel the cold going out of her at last, weeks of it, thawing there against my hands where I'd put them up to cover hers without deciding to. I choose, she said, to be seen by you. Say my name once more. Naileth Vane, I said. My voice wasn't steady. 19 years alone will do that to a man handed a thing he never learned how to hold. Last sovereign of the Asari reach, not ended, not broken, not thrown away. I turned my head the smallest motion so my rough cheek pressed the palm she had against my jaw. Seen. The dray hummed around us. Out past the hull the weft turned slow, the dead hulls and the scoured pods and the whole silted length of everything nobody had come back for, and somewhere down at the bottom of it was an empty broken box I'd pulled a sovereign out of because a transponder wouldn't stop ticking. I did not sell her. I have thought about it many times since, in the way you worry an old choice, and it has never once come out any way but the way it came out. She stayed. We worked the lane together, she at the scope she couldn't see, reading returns by sound and mass better than I ever had, correcting my sums, me at the grapple, describing the world to her as I hauled it up, the two of us building the weft between us out of touch and voice. The dispute never closed. Every so often in a far port, some cold clerk would find the line still open in the registry and understand what it meant, that the last of House Vane lived and was known to have been left for an omen, and it would put a stone in a shoe somewhere I'd never see, and that was fine. That was enough. We were not restoring a throne. We were just refusing, the two of us, to let a true thing be scoured off. She never got her sight back. I never got handsome. Neither of us minded in the end, because we'd each been given the one thing our own kind had decided we weren't worth, and had found out, late and out past the edge of everything, that our own kind had simply been too frightened to keep it. I was 43 years old, and I had spent 19 years turning thrown-away things back into things worth having, and I never once, in all that work, pulled anything out of the dark worth half of what I found ticking at the bottom of a dead lane on a gray shift I'd nearly slept through. She saw me. That's the whole of it. A blind woman, my own silence, and her own people's omens had both agreed to leave alone, and she was the first one in 19 years to lay her hands on my plain face and call the plainness a thing worth trusting. I keep the mug, the dented one, I never leave a burr on it.